I'm now in conversation with Professor David Crookall, who's been a good friend of mine over quite a number of years. He's based in the south of France. He's a passionate environmentalist, and he's been involved in quite a number of things over the years that we will touch on. He's one of the panelists for our webinar on Planet Earth after COVID-19 on Tuesday. And I'm having a conversation with David to find out a little bit more and give him a chance to share some of his experiences over the years. So we were talking just a few minutes ago, and you're a Brit, but you left dear old England at quite an early age. When you were 20, you told me.
Right, right.
Yeah? So what happened then when you went to France? You didn't go there intending to stay, did you?
Well, my initial idea was just to go to France for a year. There's a kind of gap year.
Okay. And what persuaded you to stay in France?
Well, French way of life.
Okay.
But after a year, I enrolled in doing some French classes, but I didn't go to any of the classes because I didn't feel I was learning anything. So I learned French in the street, as it were.
Yeah.
And then I enrolled in a French university and got a grant to study in France from the British government.
Right.
I wouldn't ever do that now, of course.
No.
And so I stayed and did my studies in France. And then I stayed on and got work here.
And you became a teacher. What were you teaching when you started your teaching career?
Well, very early, I got a few sort of temporary jobs to earn a little bit of pocket money teaching English. And then I went on to teach university, and there I started teaching more sort of professional communication skills.
And teaching professional communication skills, where did you start to get involved in games and simulations?
This was pretty early, soon after I arrived in France. When I started actually teaching my first classes, I remember one class, it was in the architectural school, no, a business school in Marseille. And I felt, well, I really got to do something which is a little bit more interesting for the students and for me. So I started doing active things and getting them involved. And after a while, I began to find out that these things, they called them games.
Yes, we now know them as serious games. So,
well, I don't agree with the term serious game, but other people use it, so why not?
Yeah.
But I prefer just games, educational games.
Yeah, educational games, games-based learning. Yes, the serious games part, well, it was when I was the founding director of the Serious Games Institute, in a way, it was almost a mixed blessing.
Right.
Because serious and games don't really go together in the same sentence in most people's minds. So the fact that you were having this kind of juxtaposition and serious and games really was an opening to explain to people that the games weren't serious. It was the end product or the outcome of the games that was going to be serious, not just purely for entertainment, but for education, behavioral change and all that kind of thing. So really, you've been quite a pioneer in games-based learning and simulation over quite a number of years.
Well, I've been doing it fairly early, and then I joined up with the British Association of Simulation and Gaming. It was called SAGSET. And then I joined up with the American one called NASAGA, and then the international one, ISAGA. And then after about 12, 15 years ago, I actually helped to found one of these associations in Thailand.
Yes,
and they've gone from strength to strength. And so, you know, learning through games and simulations is something that spans the world now.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where, of course, I met you for the first time at a Thai Sim conference in Krabi. and we've been communicating, and we've been friends ever since then. And
Well, I
over
remember first hearing about you as director of the Serious Games Institute. And I thought, gosh, this guy, Dave Wortley, must be quite somebody. And then when I met him, I realized that he was.
well, I was waiting for the punchline there.
Well, that was it.
Yeah, that's a real. I hope I wasn't a disappointment. So
No,
no,
I was actually
no.
felt pretty honored to meet with you and then become friends with you. It's I've always
No.
enjoyed everything
Yeah.
that you've been doing.
Well, it's the same is true of me, and the work that you've done in establishing TISIM, and the changes that have come about as a result of your work and your energy, not just in TISIM, but also your long-standing involvement in ISAGA, is a wonderful, lasting legacy. And of course, that is what I primarily know you as, rather than on the environmental side. But from
Well,
our yeah,
I've
from our,
been, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, from our discussion earlier on, you come from a family that's got a lot of environmental interests. You enjoy walking in the countryside. You were diving at quite an early age, and I understand that you wanted to get involved in oceanography, like Tim Folsman.
Well, I love the oceans. And when I finished the equivalent of high school, I wanted to become an oceanographer. And so I sort of kept this love of the oceans all my life and have done various things related to the oceans. I learned how to dive here in Britain, there in Britain.
Yeah.
Even once broke the ice on a lake to go diving. That's absolutely crazy thing to do. Crazy. And then I got my diving certificate in Thailand 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to live in the United States, I got a huge grant from the federal government to do a big worldwide simulation where we had teams all around the world, each representing a certain country. And the simulation was about the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea.
Ah, okay.
Where we're now at the third international conference on the law of the sea. So it's a conference that's been going on for years and years, decades.
Yes.
And this was before the web.
Yes.
It was at the beginning of the internet.
Yeah.
So there was communication, and we had teams in different parts of the world, and each team represented a country, and each team had a teacher.
Right.
And they were negotiating the treaty of the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea. And each simulation lasted about 7 or 8 weeks.
Right.
And it was a pretty massive undertaking. I'd never ever do it again. I mean, the work involved is just crazy. But at the last simulation that we ran, we had 900 people participating in different places around the world.
And what year would that be, roughly?
That would be in the late 80s, I think, or late 80s, I think.
Yes. Well, that's remarkable, as you say. It was in the very early days of communications technology, and that's one of the things that we've got in common. We've always, I think, both of us have tried to push the boundaries of what communications technology can do.
Oh, yeah.
But to undertake a virtual conference or simulation exercise involving many different countries is, well, it would be a massive undertaking today, let alone in those days. So,
well, you could almost say in some ways it was slightly simpler in the sense that all we had was written text.
Right.
And there was no web, so there was none of this fancy stuff, and it was all based on text that was sent back through a central server in the United States.
Yes.
But in some ways, that is also what made it so exciting. And what I tell people is that for some kinds of simulation, you don't need all this fancy stuff because it's all here.
Yes.
And that sort of lends weight to people who say, well, I much prefer to listen to the radio than to watch TV.
Yes.
Because the scenery is so much more beautiful on the radio.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in simulation because it's all here.
Yes.
And when we take part, it gradually becomes reality. We don't stop. We stop thinking in terms of simulation. It's only afterwards that we come back to it and think about it through debriefing.
Yes, that exactly, and that leads on very nicely actually to one of the other things that's always impressed me, and that is that your understanding and awareness of the value of debriefing in not only educational purposes, but also in behavioral change. So when I've been involved in some of your games, or I've been an observer of some of your games, it's very obvious that the participants are totally engaged in what they're doing. You know, you create these exercises and simulations where people, if you like, put aside the real world and get really absorbed in this new reality, or this new simulation that you've created. And they're so engaged in it that it needs something at the end of it to actually put some meaning to what they've done. So you get the enjoyment, you get the engagement, but it's in the debriefing that the real learning and behavior change comes across. Yeah,
exactly.
So what's your involvement in environmental issues at the present time? What sort of things are you involved with at the moment?
Well, they've been going on for quite a number of years, but I stopped editing the journal Simulation and Gaming, which was the top journal in the field for many years. It had its 50th anniversary 2 or 3 years ago, and I was editor for 26 years. And then I handed it over to 3. And I was rather relieved because I was getting more and more itchy to get into environmental stuff or get more, have more impact in it.
Yeah.
And so I did various things, and then I hooked up with a good publisher, a special issue of one of their journals, and the theme is learning sustainability.
Right.
And the rationale is that, you know, we hear so much about sustainability and the economic side and the environmental side and the social side, and they all have to mix together. But people seem to forget that we learn all that. Just like in other areas of life, we have to learn it as human beings. And so the element of learning in sustainability, I think, has somehow been forgotten because it's sort of taken for granted. But we can't take learning for granted because there's so much damage being done to the environment. People are just not learning that they must look after it. So this special issue tries to address that a little bit.
Well, that's very relevant to the webinar on Tuesday, because one of the things that occurs to me is that although COVID-19 is a terrible tragedy, and is going to bring about some really, really bad things, in a sense, judging by what we see on television about people using technologies like we're using today, having more involvement within their local communities, there may be people are learning a different way of life, which is going to be more sustainable. And so that's a theme of the conference, is to debate and try and discuss whether at this point in time, because of COVID-19, we have a unique opportunity to actually create a new normal, a set of behaviors which are much more sustainable than what we were involved with before. So
Well, I
I
hope
think
so.
that I think that's a very good place to finish our interview, because we can talk about this for a long time and there'll be
Long
plenty of
time.
opportunity on Tuesday. And it just remains for me to say thank
Well,
you,
could I
David.
just add
Please, yeah.
one little thing? Another thing that I'm helping to prepare is a summer school. It's now become an autumn school because of the virus, and it will be on oceans and climate change.
Right,
And it will be a 3 day sort of summer school, autumn school, where people from all walks of life come, and part of the summer school will be a day and a half long simulation, what we call a participatory simulation.
right, right,
And it'll be examining all these interfaces. Maybe it'll bring in health issues, virus issues. That's for the simulation participants to decide for themselves.
right, right. And where was this going to be? Where was it planned
Well,
for?
it was going to be, it still is going to be here in the south of France.
Okay. Oh,
Uh,
oh, good. But so it may well still be a physical event, but in the
oh, we hope
autumn
it can
rather
be
than the summer.
physical, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you once again, David. I look forward to talking to you again on Tuesday. And
You?
I'm sure it's going to be an excellent webinar. We've got some great panelists alongside yourself, and I look forward to a very active discussion.
And
Thank
thank
you.
you for this initiative, David.